go. Good evening and welcome to Thorold City Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and I'll call for the adoption of the agendas. Councillor Sharon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Payon, that the council adopt the agendas for the meeting of May 15th, 2018.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I'll move right into my mayor's report. At the Niagara Regional Public Works meeting this morning that I attended, the city was awarded $363,000 for combined sewer overflow. You've heard the term CSO, so that's what it means. $90,000 has been allocated to Thorold South Sanitary Sewer Flow Monitoring Phase 4, $10,000 for Beaver Dams Road Area Sanitation Sewer Study, $87,500 for Port Robinson East Storm Sanitary Sewer Study, $150,000 to support the Weeping Tile Disconnection Program, and $25,500 for sanitary sewer spot repair. So we had a good day at the region today. Bridget, the Port Robinson Ferry is up and running for the 2018 season. Beginning May 19th, ferry service will be available daily from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. until the end of the season in the fall. Thorold municipal offices will be closed on Monday, May 21st for the Victoria Day long weekend. Regular office hours will resume on Tuesday, May 22nd at 8:30 a.m. The City of Thorold wishes all of our residents a happy Victoria Day weekend. We remind everyone to be safe on the roads and make responsible choices this weekend. Okay. Okay, I have one more. I would like to congratulate our CAO, Manoj Delwadia. Last week, he received the Transportation Planning Professional of the Year Award from the Ontario Traffic Council. And I have one more very special, very, very important announcement. And it was handed to me by the chief today. It's called Help Adam. And I'm going to, and here's the poster that's going up all over town. This young fellow is suffering from brain cancer, and they're having a fundraiser for him this Saturday at Richmond Street School. And I'll turn it over to the chief to explain the whole event. I'll just hold it here for now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity for this. Thorold Fire Department, this is a member of our own family from the Thorold Fire Department. It's a son of a firefighter at Station 4. Poor little guy, 8 years old, going through brain cancer. So the Thorold Fire Department and the Richmond Public School, where he goes to, has rallied around. We're going to have a car wash and barbecue this Saturday from 10 to 2. All proceeds are going to help him just to pay some of the costs and bills that are associated with even just parking at Hospital for Sick Kids as he's going through his treatments for 4th stage brain cancer. So any help out, anyone wants to show up and get their car washed or have a hot dog hamburger, we'd be happy to see everybody in the community. Thanks,
Chief, for bringing that forward. And I just handed the chief $20, and I'm challenging everybody else to match it. And that concludes my remarks. And I'll call for the adoption of the minutes. Councillor Whalen, I believe you have that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Longo, that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on May the 1st, 2018 be hereby adopted.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. General Committee meeting minutes of May 1st. Councillor Payon.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Sharon, that the General Committee meeting minutes of May 1st, 2018 be hereby adopted.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I'd like to call for, are there any conflicts of interest, councillors? Seeing none, I'll move on. We have a public meeting now. pursuant to the Planning Act. And this public meeting is being held pursuant to the provisions of the Building Code Act 7 in brackets 2. A sign-in sheet is located at the back if you wish to receive future correspondence regarding the review. At the same table, copies of the staff report and proposed bylaw are available for your information. We'll move to the presentation of the building permit and inspection services review. We have Watson and Associates Economists Limited, consultant for the city, to present an overview of the building permit and inspection service review. And could you please state your name, sir? I don't have it listed here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Andrew Grunda.
Okay. You're gonna have to speak right into that microphone.
Sorry, it's Andrew Grunda from Watson and Associates.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint. There we are. Thank you. So the purpose of the presentation this evening is, as was mentioned in the introduction, the statutory requirements to undertake a public meeting if a municipality considers changing its fees with respect to building permits. Our firm was retained by the city to undertake a review of the cost of the Building Code Act services that are provided and recovered through building permit fees. The scope of that undertaking was to review those costs of service in the context of the legislative limitations that are applied to municipalities in that regard, to seek to maximize full cost recovery from those benefiting users, and to minimize any potential implications that may have on the tax base for the city. And so in doing that, we've undertaken a full cost review in the context of the statutory authority and those permissions. In that regard, the Building Code Act is the authority that municipalities have to recover the cost of service. That was amended in 2005 with the Building Code Statute Law Amendment Act, which limited municipalities' ability to recover building permit fees, only entitling those costs to the reasonable costs of administration enforcement under the code. In addition to that, what it requires of municipalities is that on an annual basis, you need to report not only the revenues you collected, but the costs of providing those services, both the direct and indirect costs. And the Act also permits you to have a Building Code Act reserve fund. And so it being a reserve fund allows you to accumulate funds to be able to address the sustainability of those services that are being provided, but they can only be used for the purposes of Building Code Act services. And we'll talk a bit more in terms of the methodology surrounding that. What we've seen in municipalities is an evolution of this process, because while the Act speaks to the cost justification being across the entirety of the code, many municipalities have undertaken the review to look at the cost revenue implications at the various types, whether those be for new permits, whether they be for types of permits, whether those are residential or industrial, commercial, or institutional, whether they're for alteration permits or other minor permits, to help gauge better how those pricing decisions should be made. So the approach that we take in the context of that legislative authority is to undertake what's referred to as an activity-based costed approach, which simply means that we are concerned with what are those activities that the municipality is providing through those building permits, as you see documented on the right-hand side of the illustration, and then understanding the staff that is involved across the organization, although that's largely in building, there's also involvement from other areas, to provide those services to those benefiting parties. Those costs of service of those staff are largely what informs the costs that are being recovered through building permits, but also, as I mentioned earlier, the Act allows us to include indirect costs in that those frontline service departments couldn't provide those services unless they had sufficient support of governance, of finance, human resources, facility support, and the like. And so this approach seeks to understand both those direct and indirect costs. And so in that definition, as you'll see identified further in the report, the way direct costs are defined is that it includes operating costs of the individuals who are directly involved in providing those activities. It also includes capital costs that they utilize as a result of providing those services in the form of facility space that's being occupied and additional equipment in the form of computers, phones, and the like that allow them to provide those services to constituents. The indirect costs, again, are those that are provided in support functions, where we've looked at those areas such as human resource or IT support, and how those are consumed by the direct departments to have them follow those individuals into those activities. And so as part of that methodology and fulfilling that approach, we met with staff and had a number of discussions around how we should categorize these various activities. As you can see, the groupings identified as Group A, Group B, Group C as an example, follow the definitions as per the code, recognizing the different types of permits, whether those are residential, assembly, institutional, and the like. We've also looked at new permits as opposed to permits that would be issued for alterations or repairs, plumbing permits, demolitions, change of use, and the like. So this gives us a granular understanding in terms of the cost of providing those various types of permits as opposed to just the overall service across the code. And so in fulfilling the costing undertaking, what we've done is then for each of those categories, we established process maps to identify what is a typical process undertaken by the city in delivering those permits. We looked at the time that's spent across the organization with respect to undertaking that process once. And then, as opposed to just moving to costing at that stage, we've undertaken a due diligence review to ensure that those estimates are reasonable. And the way that we do that is we take the time that the municipality spends on those processes, compare them to historic average volumes on an annual basis to make sure that staff are working within their available capacity to provide that level of service. One of the things that we noticed in doing that was that the municipality's volume in terms of residential building permits has increased recently and is expected to continue on in that regard going forward. And so that's had a requirement for additional capacity to provide that service to that increase in volume of activity. Historically, those average volumes over the last 3 years have been about 155 permits. The municipality is expecting that to increase to about 133 annually going forward over the forecast period. And so having understood that then allows us to look at those costs on a permit by permit basis, compare them to your current fees, to then allow us to understand how to make adjustments to those current fee schedules that you have. The one item that I noted earlier was that in addition to recovering the cost of service, the Act also permits municipalities to have reserve funds to sustain building code services. And the reason for that is when the Act was amended in 2005, it didn't only cap the revenue recovery at costs, it also imposed higher standards on municipalities to meet mandated turnaround times, to make sure that you had certified building officials that could provide those services in a timely manner. And so in developing these fees, what municipalities have largely acknowledged is that because of those tighted mandated turnaround times, it's reasonable that municipalities should be preserving funds in years where they have excess revenue in a reserve fund to weather any downturn that may occur in the future, so that when the economy picks back up, you would have sufficient staff available to be able to meet those mandated turnaround times as required under the Act. And so in measuring that, the measurement looks at those average costs relative to those historic downturns, and it's suggested that target that you should build your reserve fund to should be about roughly 2.2 times your annual direct costs before you would be in contravention of what the Act requires in terms of limiting your fees at costs. By comparison, your revenues or your reserve fund today, which has a balance of about $550,000, is at approximately about 1.2 times. So what that suggests is that there's room to further enhance your stabilization through your fee setting. When we, as I mentioned earlier, looked at the time to undertake these processes, provide them to historic volume levels, as you can see here, in terms of the historic period of 2015 to 2017, the municipality was expending about 4.5 full-time equivalent positions providing that service. The building department, as you can see, represents the greatest amount of support at just under 4 FTEs over that historic period. And with that increase in volume that's expected, whereby volumes would increase to about 333 residential permits a year, we would expect to see that increase up to current FTE full utilization levels at 6 individuals in the building department, or more appropriately over the entire organization, adding about 2 additional persons compared to historic levels. So what that translates into when we take that staff utilization, apply the salary, wage, and benefits from your 2018 budget and other direct costs and capital costs, is that it costs the organization approximately $571,000 a year to be able to provide that level of service. As you can see, the majority of that cost is in the form of direct costs. The indirect costs represent about 17% of that total cost, or just under $100,000 a year. And based on the reviews we've done in approximately 30 municipalities across the province, that is reasonable and comparable in that respect. Recognizing that the municipality is currently at below its targeted reserve fund levels for stabilization, if that was to be targeted over the next 5 years, which the fee structure assumes, is that would add an additional $85,000 in annual cost to sustain that reserve. When we compare your current fees to those costs, you're currently recovering about $400,000 a year, or in the context of that full cost amount, recovering about 62% of those costs. And so what that would suggest is that if there was no increase in fees, then ultimately the current reserve that you have would be depleted, and you would be looking at tax support to sustain those services going forward. So in light of that, as you'll see documented in the report, we're recommending that the fees be adjusted. The way we've considered doing that is looking again at that relationship of revenue to those projected costs to make those adjustments, but also doing so in the context of your competitive position within the region and the city of Hamilton as well, to help inform that, so that we're not putting any of these recommendations out of step with what you're seeing in those other communities. We're also recommending that the municipality, in going forward and reporting, continue to monitor building permit volumes and those underlying characteristics to help better inform future fee decisions at a more granular level. And so if we look at what those fee structure recommendations would result in, we've looked at a few different impact analysis here. The first is looking at a 100-unit residential subdivision, recognizing that those developments not only have to pay building permit fees, but would also have to pay the subdivision fee under the Planning Act and development charges. What you'll see here is that with the proposed fee, which would add about $620 per unit to that residential permit, that equates to about a 2% overall cost impact to that developer. And so to put that in perspective, the reason for that is when you look at the building permit fee, which is the green shaded section in the bar graph, that building permits typically represent about 9% of that cost per unit. The municipality's development charges is representing roughly about 90% of that cost, and more indicative of what those market impacts may be, as opposed to moving towards full cost recovery levels for building permit services. If we look at what's typically considered sort of a non-development type of applicant, what you would see more commonly from your current constituents, residential alterations, in this case of about $560 a square foot. Today you would charge them about $364 for that permit. Increasing that to about $590 would add about $226 per permit. And to put that in some perspective, these are the types of permits where municipalities typically are under recovering those costs of service. And so doing that in the context of market is more appropriate, because what we're attempting not to do is to have people circumvent the regulatory process and move forward without going through the permit process by establishing fees that would be too high. So we're doing that in the context of your neighbors and putting those fees comparable to those in St. Catharines and Fort Erie. And finally, similarly, when we see deck permits today, the municipality charges $120 approximately for a 300 square foot deck. The proposed fees would see adding about $74 to that permit fee, again, making that less than the charges in St. Catharines and Pelham, slightly higher than those we see in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Niagara Falls, and some of the other regional area municipalities. So that concludes the presentation. Obviously, if there's any questions or comments, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for your presentation. Councilors, are there any questions? Thank you very much. There's no questions.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll move into the public input portion of this public meeting. If a person or public body chooses to not provide oral comments at the public meeting or written comments before the proposed building permit fee increase is adopted, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision to the Ontario Municipal Board. Now, at this time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed building permit fees increase? Please come forward to the podium. This is a big rush to come forward. Okay.
Can I pull the screen out? Can I do the screen?
Yeah, go ahead. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak in opposition of the proposed building permit fees increase? Please come forward to the podium. I don't see anybody. I'll go into my closing remarks. This fulfills the requirements of the Building Code Act 7 in brackets 2. The city's general committee will consider staff's recommendation report and bylaw this evening. Anyone wishing to receive a copy of City Council's decision as a result of this review is asked to submit their request in writing to the city clerk. As such, the public meeting portion of this portion is now closed. We have nothing under civic recognition. There are no presentations. Motions for support. Statement by councilors. We have one, and that's Councilor Ugolini.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to give a little bit of feedback on the Town and Gown Conference. On May 8th and 9th of last week, I attended the Town and Gown Association of Ontario 2018 Symposium at McMaster University in Hamilton. The theme for this year was Purpose and Partnerships, and we worked on ways to strengthen town and gown collaborations in our communities, and we shared best practices and discussed new approaches and trends that are developing. Some of the topics that were discussed, we spent a half a day on homecoming to St. Paddy's Day and what different municipalities in Ontario are doing relating to those issues. We talked about students in the community and where students are getting involved in different initiatives within the community. We discussed mental health issues, alcohol issues, and so it was good to hear from all the major universities in Ontario and what they're doing and what we're doing, because we were there with representatives from Brock University. And so we're going to bring this back to our Town and Gown Committee and our subcommittee and work on implementing maybe some of the things that are going on that have been successful in other universities. As well, Brad Clark from Brock and myself met with executive members, and I can say that it's looking very positive that Niagara will be hosting the Town and Gown Symposium next spring at Brock University. So, thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Compared to Niagara, say our student issues, how do we compare to the other municipalities like Kitchener, Guelph, U of T?
I can say that we are in a lot better shape than a lot of those municipalities. But that being said, and that's why we have to be diligent and work together, is a few years ago, Guelph never had any issues, and look where they are today. So it's imperative that we work together, and we have been, to make sure that we keep moving in a positive direction.
Thank you for that. The reason I asked you that question, because you pointed it out to me.
Oh yeah, there are some dandy stories.
Okay, notice of motions. Are there any notices of motions? Okay, I'll call for council, committee, and board meeting minutes. Councilor Hanley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Longo, that council receive and file the minutes of the committees of council, local boards as presented.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, we'll resolve into general committee. I think we'll keep it going. I'll call this general committee meeting to order, and I'll ask for, are there any conflicts of interest? Seeing none, we do not have any delegation. I'll call for reports to be brought forward from consent. Are there any consent items that a counselor would like to pull? And seeing none, I'll move to our discussion reports. We only have one.
We need a mover.
What?
We need a mover and a vote on the consent reports.
Okay, sorry, I forgot something there. Moved by Counselor Ugolini, seconded by Counselor.
Seconder. No second.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll move on to the discussion reports, and we have only one. PDS 2018-11, Building Bylaw Updated Schedule of Fees. The General Committee recommends and approves the Schedule A to Bylaw 73-2010, being the building permit bylaw, be deleted in its entirety and replaced by Bylaw 56-218, being the updated schedule of building permit fees. And I'll call on Martin to present the report.
That was the recommendation.
That is your recommendation? Okay. The report is, I need a mover for that recommendation. Councilor Sharon. Speakers to the report. Are there any speakers to this report that was just presented to us? I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. Okay, we'll be going into camera now. I need a motion to go in camera. Councilor Whalen. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. In camera session, City Clerk's verbal report, 23A, St. David Street East. In camera, potential disposition of land. B, Mayor's verbal report, senior management team, identifiable individuals. In camera, General Committee meeting minutes of May 1st, 2018. And we'll move in camera.